Good.
So hello everyone, welcome to Missiology 101. I'm Miss Samano, and this class is for first year students who are aspiring missionaries. So we'll go ahead and get started. This lecture will be basically a condensed lecture of the entire class. So we'll start with a prayer because we're going to start all our classes with prayer. So let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we give you the honor and the glory. Thank you, Jesus, for this beautiful day, for allowing us to be healthy and alive and at a beautiful university. Bless these students' minds and confirm their calling as missionaries. In Jesus' name, amen. So one of the goals of this class is to confirm your calling as a missionary. So we'll go ahead and get started, and I want you guys to think about where God has called you to be a missionary. And if he has also called you to have a vocation. Because not all missionaries are full-time missionaries. Some have vocations. So a vocation, so they're missionary doctors, missionary nurses, or missionary teachers. And if any of you would like to share, I'd love to hear. All right. So now we're going to talk about how missions have changed. The modern American missionary movement. And this is the American missionary movement. So that's what I'm going to focus on, just because missions are so broad. The first change that we have is a change in demographics. So can anybody give me a guess of what marital status and what gender most missionaries were?
Single men.
No, it's single, yes, single women. For decades, most missionaries were single women. Now that has really changed. Most missionaries now are going out as married couples with their families. Another change in missions is a change in perception. So before, a missionary was seen as somebody who forsook everything, like comforts family, to go and preach the gospel in a distant land. And a missionary oftentimes would live in danger. They would live with economic and physical privations. Nowadays, that's very different. Most mission organizations have allow missionaries to live a very tolerable life. And it varies depending on where you go, but you can live a comfortable life as a missionary nowadays. And then also change in geographic emphasis. So before, most missionaries, in the 19th century, most missionaries were from Great Britain. Today, as in during the 20th century, most missionaries are from the United States or North America. And then throughout the 19th and 20th century, can anybody guess what country was like the focus for missionaries to go to?
China?
Yes. Very good, Hannah. China. They actually even had, England had the China Inland Mission, which was focused primarily on sending missionaries to China. Nowadays that has changed. Missionaries are focused today on an area that missiologists call the 1040 window, which is this area along the equator. And this is where the gospel, where there's least Christians and where the gospel is not, where it's an area that's really in need of the gospel. So this is where missionaries are focusing now. So the missionary movement has changed. And then let's talk about the influence of missionaries. Missionaries have, throughout the 19th and 20th century, they've had a lot of influence. First off, in academia, a lot of times a retiring missionary would come back to the United States and take up a post in a university. So they would really shape the students' perception of a non-Western, non-Christian society. Another influence is in Hollywood. From the 1930s to 1960s, there was like many films produced which had a missionary theme, and they starred really popular movie stars. Have any of you guys seen The Inn of the Sixth Happiness? All right. Well, it starred Ingrid Bergman, who was really popular movie star in the 1950s. And it's a story of this missionary. It's a true story of a missionary that goes to China, a single woman, and she has these great adventures. And then another area where missionaries have had influence is in media. For those of you who are in 20th century America, we talked about Henry Luce, who's quoted as saying that the 20th century was the American century. So Henry Luce, that's him right there. He's the founder of Time magazine and Life magazine, and he was also he was born in China to missionary parents. And Life actually covered missionary stories and stories about Christians, and it was a secular magazine, so that's another place where missionaries have had influence. And the last place is in diplomacy. A lot of the times, the offspring of missionaries and their families would come back to the United States and take up diplomatic posts, or they would influence in foreign affairs. So an example is FDR appointed Lincoln Stewart, who was a missionary educator. During the 1940s, he appointed him as ambassador to China. So missionaries have had a lot of influence in American society. Now we're going to go to the more personal aspect of this class, which is so the aspect of you being a missionary. So first we're going to talk about the idea of getting a call. So there's this idea of the Macedonian call, and this refers to Acts chapter 16, where Paul is traveling on one of his missionary journeys, and he has a dream where this man from Macedonia tells him to come to Macedonia and basically preach the gospel because they were in need. So before, for decades, some Christians believe that you cannot have a genuine calling to the mission field if you don't get a Macedonian call. So it's like God has to tell you that you need to be a missionary in a supernatural way, visions, strange voices. So this is a myth. Definitely you do not need this sort of call. Another idea that is a myth too is that you don't need a call at all, because we're all Christians and we're all supposed to be spreading the gospel, so you can just go wherever you like and do whatever you want as long as you're spreading the gospel. That's life too, right? There's a general call of God, which we all get, called repentance, called salvation. There is called a particular Christian service, and being a missionary falls under that. Call to a particular Christian service. So, now we're going to talk about, are there any questions so far? All right. Oh, yes.
Yeah, you talked about the 1040 window. I was curious why it was called that. Is that like the latitude there? Okay.
Yes, it's 10 degrees north to south and 10 degrees.
Latitude, longitude?
Yes. But good question. Okay, now let's talk about obstacles that arriving at the mission field. Now I want you guys to look at these up. Have a look at this list. And I want you to tell me if any of these surprise you. And why. So do any of these surprise you? No. Okay. Well, I found some of them surprising, like higher education. So it is proven that the longer you stay in the United States and the more education you get, the less likely it is that you will arrive at the mission. Just because the more education you get, you will get a better paying job after. Also, the accumulation of debts. A mission board is not going to accept somebody who has a significant loan debt. And I know we're all familiar with loans nowadays, so that can be a problem. Love and marriage. So if you're a prospective aspiring missionary, you marry somebody who it's not their plan to be a missionary. What ends up happening a lot of the times is that the prospective missionary forfeits their missionary. Another is parental opposition. This can come from non-Christian parents and Christian parents. And this is understandable, right? Because your parents want you to be saved, they want you to have economic ease, and being a missionary doesn't provide economic ease a lot of times, and a lot of times you do live in danger, depending on where you go. And then there's health problems, so mission board is not going to make an investment on somebody who has significant health problems, because not only is it a danger to the person, but it's a danger to the organization, because if the person dies or something, that money would have, in a way, been wasted. And then also lack of direction, lack of Bible training, lack of practical experience, and attractive offers at all. So there are many obstacles to arriving at the mission. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the missionary cycle of life. So this is the cycle that generally every missionary will go through. It's not exactly the same for everybody. But But stage 1 of the missionary cycle is when you get the initial commitment that you want to go to the mission field. And this is also when you're questioned by your relatives. And a lot of times it's in a negative way, or they have opposition. And then stage 2 is general training. So this just involves for you to get an education. Even regardless of what major you study, it's going to benefit you to get a degree. And then afterwards, go to the mission. And then stage 3 is field selection. So a lot of times a missionary, they feel God calling to work in a specific country or with a specific people group, or they don't know, they don't have an idea where they want to go, they can go on a trip to missionary trip. And then after field selection, you've got stage 4, focused training. This includes studying the language, the culture, and then stage 5 is initial adjustment. So now in this stage, you're already in your new host culture. And in the initial adjustment stage, you've got 3 substages, which I will talk about in a minute. Stage 6, long-term missionary service. So this is when you're settled, you're fluent in the language, and you're working away. And then after many, many decades, you'll go to stage 7, which is when you come back to your home culture, which also includes, there's a lot of stress in this stage because not only has home changed, but you have changed. So, all right. Now the 3 subsections in the initial adjustment stage. So this is the acculturation process when you're learning a new culture. So the first, in this stage, you have the glamour stage. So just think about it. For years you've been dreaming to be a missionary in Afghanistan, right? And you finally get to Afghanistan, so a lot of times what a missionary will do is they glamorize the culture, the superficial aspects of the culture, because they don't really know the culture well. And then after a few months, and you get to know the culture well enough, especially the negative aspects of the culture, you either reject the culture or you adapt it. And a lot of times if you reject it, you will just go home. If you adapt it, then you will move on to that identification stage, which is when you're fluent in the language, and then you're working away in gospel work, and this becomes your home. So that is a successful acculturation process. Any questions? Well, now I'm going to talk about 2 missionaries during the 20th century who shaped Americans' attitudes about missions and about Christianity. And they did so in very different ways. And I talk about these 2 missionaries because they really show you the spectrum of where a missionary could end up in regarding to their faith. A lot of the times, well, we'll take the first example. So the case of Pearl S. Buck. Have any of you guys heard of Pearl S. Buck? Well, probably in the 30s and 40s. She was very popular. She's first and foremost known as an author, best-selling author. She wrote a really famous novel titled The Good Earth about a Chinese peasant family. So to Americans, she really shaped the idea of China for many decades. But Buck grew up, she was born in China. She was born to American Presbyterian missionaries. And what is interesting about Buck is that at the end of her life, so she started out, she grew up in China, went to college in the US for a brief period, came back and worked as a missionary for the first 4 years of her life. What was interesting is that she ended up, at the end of her life, rejecting Christianity. And this is due to several reasons. Some are personal. For one is that her only daughter was severely mentally handicapped, and she had to part with her. She had to hospitalize her in an institution. So that's something that significant that made Buck lose her faith, and other personal things. But toward the 1940s and to the rest of her life, she really exhibited a lot of anti-Christian attitudes. And what's interesting about Buck is that this shows you that the missionary enterprise, had both losses and victories. And you can say Buck's life, in a sense, it was a loss as a missionary because she ended her life rejecting Christianity. So she is one example. And in her work, her writings were very influential for Americans for many decades. And then another example of a missionary who had a positive influence in the United States about missions is Elizabeth Elliot. Have any of you guys heard of Elizabeth Elliot? Wow. She was a missionary in Ecuador in the 1950s, but she's most famous because her husband was one of the 5 men who were killed in 1956 in Ecuador trying to evangelize the Auca Indians. What's interesting about Elliot and the 5 widows, because these men left behind 5 widows and many children, is that not only did they stayed in Ecuador to continue mission work, and also eventually these natives, the Auca Indians, they were evangelized, and a church was established among them. But Elliot was really influential because she wrote this book called Through the Gates of Splendor, which told the story of 5 men. And their story in this book really influenced a whole generation of missionaries who were inspired by the story and decided to go out to mission. So that is the story of Elizabeth Elliot, and she recently died. Here's some pictures. So the first picture in color, that is some of the men and their families. A few weeks before some of the men were killed. And then the black and white picture is the widows and their children. And most of them actually did, I think all of them did remain in Ecuador to continue mission. And then Elizabeth Elliot's famous book, Through the Gates of Splendor. So these 2 women show you, these 2 missionaries who had very different responses to the missionary cause and movement, show you that the missionary movement is a complex thing, and it continues to change today. So I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if you have any questions, go ahead and ask.
One question. You said there's like a process to like how they like say that because sometimes people either adapt or they reject it. Do you know like what like the percentage of that is, or like how many people are like midway through like, oh, this isn't for me, or you know like how often that happens?
I do not, but good question. I will look it up.